The crutches clattered against the tarmac as Elijah collapsed onto the cabin floor, his ankle twisting with a sickening crack. Gasps rippled through first class, while the flight attendant sneered, brushing off the boy's pain as an inconvenience. Cameras caught it all, the humiliation, the cruelty, the silence of those who looked away. But what the crew didn't know was that Elijah wasn't alone. His father, Andre Barrett, carried authority that reached far beyond this airplane. With every second, the flight attendant's smirk edged closer to ruin because he had just crossed a line with the one man capable of dismantling the system he served. Elijah Barrett's crutches clicked softly against the polished tile floor of Northgate International Airport, echoing faintly beneath the high ceilings of Terminal B. The terminal bustled with the usual movement of morning travelers, rolling luggage murmured announcements, and the faint hum of aircraft beyond the windows. But for Elijah, each step was deliberate, calculated a rhythm forged over years of adapting. His right foot dragged slightly behind the left, supported by sleek carbon fiber crutch, its matte black frame glinting briefly under the overhead lights. The matching crutch on his left balanced his gait, his arms working in sync to maintain his pace. He kept his eyes ahead, ignoring the stares. People always looked, some with pity, others with confusion. But Elijah, now 12, and wise beyond his years, had learned to tune it out. Today wasn't about them. Today was about flying something he loved and spending time with his dad. That was rare, and that made it special. Behind him walked Andre Barrett, tall and composed, his dark navy suit sharp and clean, drawing subtle glances from passers-by. His expression was calm-focused. Unlike other parents, he didn't reach to adjust Elijah's backpack or offer to carry anything. Their agreement was unspoken but firm. Elijah wanted to walk on his own, and Andre led him. As they moved closer to Gate 41B, Elijah's heart beat a little faster, not from exhaustion, but from excitement. The large windows near the gate gave a full view of the tarmac, where their plane, a sleek silver sun-bright airjet, sat gleaming in the morning light. Elijah paused for a moment, catching his breath. He smiled, eyes bright with anticipation. "We're early," he said, glancing up at his father. Andre checked his watch and nodded, his voice smooth and measured. "Exactly how I like it." The crutch left Elijah's arm without warning. One moment, he was stepping carefully into the aircraft, leaning into the support that had carried him through terminals, sidewalks, classrooms. The next, he felt his balance tip forward as a sudden tug unmedorted him. A hand, firm cold, had snatched his right crutch from under his arm. "Let me just tuck these away," said a voice casual and dismissive. Elijah turned in confusion, his eyes rising to the uniformed man who now held his support like it was a forgotten umbrella. Trent Collier's face showed no empathy, just a smirk barely restrained. Before Elijah could speak, the man snatched the second crutch with the same mechanical grip. A breath caught in Elijah's throat. Behind him, his father stepped forward, but too late. With a sharp turn, Trent spun on his heel and strode halfway down the aisle. Then in one fluid, chilling movement, he veered toward the open cabin door and hurled both crutches outward. There was a faint metallic clatter as they hit the tarmac below. Time slowed. The passengers in the front rows fell silent, their expressions caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. A few gasped softly, not sure they'd seen what they thought they'd seen. But for Elijah, the world tilted violently. Without his crutches, gravity claimed him. His right foot gave out first. The awkward shift in balance sent a shock through his body, and he fell hard onto the narrow aircraft floor. A loud, sickening crack echoed beneath him as his ankle twisted at a cruel angle. He let out a breathless cry, his hands scrambling to brace the impact. Pain flashed up his leg like fire. Andre Barrett was already moving. His polished shoes struck the cabin floor in 3 long strides as he lunged forward, reaching for his son. Elijah. But Trent turned sharply, one palm raised as if to halt a charging stranger. His tone dropped, laced with icy disapproval. "Control your child." Andre knelt beside his son the instant Elijah hit the floor. The dull thud of the boy's body against the aircraft carpet echoing louder in Andre's mind than anything else in the cabin. Elijah's face twisted in pain, his brows furrowed, lips trembling, though he tried his best not to cry. His right ankle had already started to swell, discoloring at the edges, a visible bulge forming just above the joint. "Don't move," Andre said softly, his voice calm but taut with suppressed tension. His trained hands assessed the damage with practiced precision, barely brushing Elijah's leg before he looked up, his eyes locking onto the one man standing smugly by the galley. "We need medical assistance now." Trent Collier didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a short, disdainful laugh and turned toward the cabin door. With a lazy flick of his hand, he motioned to the gate agent still lingering just outside. He tripped. Kids exaggerate. Flight leaves in 15. His tone was dismissive, almost bored, as if a child's pain was an inconvenience to be cleared before takeoff. The passengers nearby had gone silent. Some stared, others shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should intervene. The weight of the moment sat heavy in the stale air of the cabin. Andre didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that confrontation, when done too early, could spoil the precision of a response. Instead, he pulled his phone from his coat pocket with a slow, deliberate motion and began documenting. Click. Elijah's twisted ankle. Click. The crutch bag hanging open empty. Click. The cabin door still wide open to the jet bridge beyond. The gate agent returned a minute later, breathing hard as if he had just jogged down the tarmac. He held one of the crutches awkwardly in both hands and shrugged. "We couldn't find the other one," he mumbled, avoiding Andre's eyes. Andre's jaw tensed, his expression carved in stone. He stood up slowly and helped Elijah into a sitting position, careful to keep the injured legs supported. Elijah looked pale, his breathing shallow but steady. The boy was strong, but pain had a way of finding the cracks. Elijah glanced up, whispering, "Dad, I don't want to get anyone in trouble." Andre's gaze softened just a moment. He crouched again, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "You let me worry about that." Before Elijah could respond, a quiet voice spoke from behind them. It was low composed, but carried the weight of familiarity and something sharper. Urgency. "Mr. Barrett." Andre turned instinctively, placing himself between the voice and his son. The man stood in business class, dressed in a simple gray blazer over a crisp button-down shirt. His silver-rimmed glasses reflected the overhead cabin lights, and though his face was older, now leaner, there was a sharpness to his eyes that made Andre pause. "You don't remember me," the man said, "but I worked with your brother in operations intelligence." That made Andre's focus tighten. Elijah's uncle had served in high-clearance missions, men who didn't keep company with civilians. The man's voice dropped lower, only meant for Andre. "You might want to step off this plane now." Andre stared at him, not blinking his mind, calculating variables he hadn't considered until now. This wasn't just a case of cruelty. Something deeper was moving beneath the surface. His instincts screamed it, and the man's warning only confirmed what he was already beginning to suspect. Without breaking eye contact, Andre gave a small nod. Then he turned back to Trent. "We'll deplane, but you'll be hearing from us?" Trent, still standing with arms folded, grinned smugly. "Take your tantrum somewhere else." Andre's shoes struck the terminal floor with sharp, deliberate steps as he guided Elijah down the jet bridge. The boy's right ankle, tender and swelling from the fall, barely held weight. Elijah tried to be strong, gripping his father's arm, but the pain etched itself onto his face with each step. At the bottom of the bridge, 2 airport staff members in navy blue vests rushed forward, one wheeling a chair, the other already murmuring apologies. "Sir, we're so sorry. Here, let us help your son." Andre's voice cut clean through the air. "I want the footage from that gate," he said without raising his tone. His face was unreadable calm, but unreadably firm. The younger of the two staffers, barely in his 20s and clearly new, looked toward a man approaching in a blazer with an airport badge clipped to his chest. Kevin Dole, the terminal's operations supervisor, stepped in with a trained, measured smile. "I understand this is upsetting," Sir Kevin began carefully, "but access to security footage requires a formal request." Andre reached inside his coat and drew out a sleek black ID badge. No words, no explanation, just a firm lift of the hand the badge held at Kevin's eye level. The moment Kevin saw the seal embedded into the card, the blood drained from his face. He didn't need to read the text. He recognized it. Only a handful of people on airport property carried clearance like that, and they didn't work for airlines. Kevin swallowed hard. "Oh, I'll escalate it," he stammered, already reaching for his radio. "Now," Andre said. "Not a threat, not a plea, just an instruction." Elijah slowly lowered himself onto a bench a few feet away, Crutches' lost ankle elevated slightly on his backpack. He looked pale but alert, tracking every move his father made. Andre stepped 10 feet away, positioned near a pillar, with a view of both the gate and the windows facing the runway. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Activate priority eyes on Northgate Gate 41B, he said quietly into the receiver. "Full audio and video sweep. I want external angles and interior cabin feed from timestamp 1422 to present. Forward internal comms tower coordination crew logs. Yes, right now." He ended the call and pocketed the phone. For a long moment, he stared out at the aircraft still parked, still refueling, then turned to find Elijah watching him. "Dad, what are you doing?" Elijah asked, his voice low, uncertain. Andre met his eyes. His response was quiet, heavy with memory. Something I hoped I'd never have to do again. Back inside the plane, the atmosphere was almost unnaturally relaxed. The hum of the air system filled the cabin. Trent Collier leaned against the galley wall with a self-satisfied smirk, sipping coffee from a metal tumbler as if nothing unusual had occurred. Another male flight attendant, slightly younger, clearly uncomfortable, stood nearby, unsure whether to laugh or look away. "These people," Trent scoffed, shaking his head, "think crying gets them anything. Just because the kid has crutches now, the whole world's supposed to stop." The younger attendant didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the floor. Unmoved, the man with the silver-rimmed glasses still seated in business class typed steadily into a small matte black device resting on his tray table. No wasted movement. His posture was upright, his fingers precise. He didn't react to the laughter. He didn't even look up. His right thumb hovered over the final command. He pressed send. Miles away in a back corridor of Northgate's operations wing, two airline executives zipped quietly through the terminal on a branded golf cart. Both were mid-con conversation reviewing tablet data about flight delays and VIP movements. One of their devices vibrated. A red alert banner took over the screen. "Security flag gate 41B high priority, Andre Barrett." The executive holding the tablet went rigid. His colleague leaned over his eyes, scanning the alert twice before whispering, "Tell me that's not who I think it is." The first man didn't answer. He was already tapping into the security line, issuing a direct halt to the aircraft's departure sequence. "There's a situation involving Andre Barrett," he said into his comms mic. "Do not let that flight leave. You're being removed from this flight, Trent." The words hit the cabin like a dropped tray. Captain Marrero stood in the doorway of the cockpit, his face unreadable, his voice calm but unyielding. The tension in the cabin thickened instantly. Passengers turned to watch curiosity shifting to unease. Trent Collier froze for half a second, his lips parting in disbelief. "What? On whose orders?" Corporate Security Marrero replied, his eyes steady as ever, did not flinch. "Stand down." The captain's hand rose slightly, palm open, gesturing to the aisle. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in formality. Trent's face contorted in outrage, his hands balled into fists, then quickly opened again as he tried to control his expression. The eyes of every nearby passenger burned into his back. The silver glasses man in 3A slowly rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate calm. He waited until Trent passed him in the aisle, then stepped into stride behind him, pulling something small and dark from his inside coat pocket. As Trent reached the front of the cabin still seething, the man caught up. His voice cool and measured cut through the hum of the jet bridge air conditioning. "I've logged every word you've said since the Barretts boarded," he said, holding up the tiny recorder for Trent to see. "I suggest you call legal counsel." Trent turned to snap back, but the man didn't stop walking. He passed him without breaking stride, disappearing into the terminal. Back inside, passengers murmured, confused and unsettled. A young father leaned toward his teenage son and whispered, "That's the guy who pushed the boy, isn't it?" The son nodded silently. Outside in the terminal, just beyond gate 41B, Andre Barrett knelt beside his son. Elijah sat on a padded bench beside a hastily erected medical booth, his face pale and his breathing shallow. A technician, his badge reading mark, gently secured Elijah's ankle in a stabilizing wrap. Elijah gritted his teeth, clutching the edge of the bench. He threw them. "Dad, why would someone just do that?" Andre didn't answer right away. His hands rested on Elijah's shoulders, firm but careful, anchoring his son in the chaos. He looked into Elijah's eyes, not just to comfort him, but to read him, to steady both of them. Then softly, but with unmistakable strength, Andre said, "Because some people judge what they don't understand." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was a current beneath it, one forged from years of strategy, discipline, and quiet power. The technician finished wrapping and stepped back. "It's a mild sprain, sir, but he'll need X-rays to rule out a fracture." Andre nodded once. "Thank you." Behind them, airport staff hovered nervously, unsure whether to approach. A security officer in a pressed blue uniform glanced at Andre's credentials, then quickly turned away. The mood in the terminal had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The eye of something larger had turned its focus here. Andre stood slowly adjusting the cuff of his jacket. His gaze drifted toward the tarmac, where a small crew of airline employees had gathered near the base of the jet bridge. They were speaking in hushed tones, pointing toward the plane. In the control room above the terminal, someone had frozen a security frame of the incident. Trent mid-throw the Crutches' airborne Elijah falling. That image would soon circulate far beyond the airport walls. Elijah winced as he shifted on the bench, the pressure on his ankle flaring fresh pain. He looked up at his father, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "We're not flying today, are we?" Andre exhaled slowly. "Number today." A gate agent approached cautiously, holding one of Elijah's crutches, the rubber tip scraped and dirtied. "We couldn't find the other one," he said with a helpless shrug. Andre took it without a word. The agent retreated like a man who had stepped too close to a quiet storm. For a long moment, Andre just stood there. His eyes scanned the terminal, the windows, the gates beyond. Not in panic, but in calculation. Then, in a voice only Elijah could hear, he said, "But this time." The wrong person saw it. His son didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both understood. This was no longer about a flight delay or a single cruel act. This was something else now. And somewhere people were already moving. People who knew what Andre Barrett was capable of when someone crossed a line. He stepped forward, letting the weight of the moment settle. Somewhere deep inside the terminal, the chain reaction had already begun. This is far from over. The footage looped again, grainy but undeniable. Trent Collier's arm extended the crutches, arcing through the air like thrown javelins clattering onto the tarmac beyond the open cabin door. Then came the boy's fall, the snap of the ankle, Andre's restrained but sharp movement forward. No sound accompanied the video in the darkened briefing room above Terminal C. But the tension inside didn't need volume. 5 men sat frozen around a large table, their eyes locked on the screen. No one moved. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed louder than it should have been. The walls were lined with security monitors, red indicator lights blinking like silent alarms. Each man at the table held the same thought. This was bad worse than they could afford. Raymond Keyes, the vice president of customer affairs, finally leaned forward. His fingers drummed once against the polished surface of the table before curling into a fist. He spoke low and slow, a practiced calm that barely veiled the tremble of urgency beneath it. "Do you have any idea who we just humiliated across from him?" The head of legal, Martin Listister, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His tie was loose collar unbuttoned, and there was a faint sheen on his forehead. He adjusted his glasses, then cleared his throat. "We could offer a settlement," Martin suggested, the words feeling too small as they left his mouth. Raymond looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "This isn't a lawsuit situation. This is a containment situation." He tapped twice on the edge of the tablet in front of him. A new screen opened this time, showing a dossier with a photograph. Andre Barrett, former military, now listed under Civilian Reserve Code Black. One of the junior execs, tall, red-haired, and far too young for the room, blinked. "What's Code Black?" he asked, voice tentative. Raymond didn't even glance at him. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. Code Black means he's not just some former officer. It means he moves between government intelligence and private sector contracts, quietly, effectively, legally untouchable. The room stilled again, the weight of those words settled like a storm cloud above them. "He's the kind of man you don't mess with unless you want quiet men in dark suits crawling through your HR files," Raymond added. "And right now, they're probably already watching this feed." Meanwhile, on the far side of the airport, Andre Barrett sat in a private terminal lounge, one hand resting calmly on Elijah's shoulder. His son sat quietly beside him, foot elevated on a cushioned stool, the swelling more visible by the minute. A silent television in the corner showed a weather report. No one in the lounge dared approach them. Andre pressed a single button on his encrypted phone and waited. The call connected almost instantly. "I need Trent Collier's personnel file," he said, voice low and firm, "and whoever trained him. I also want details on his security clearance approval last year, who signed it, what dates, and whether it was rushed." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a confirmation. Andre ended the call and slid the phone back into his inner jacket pocket. His expression never changed. Elijah turned toward him, confused. "Wait, you think this wasn't just about me being disabled?" Andre looked at his son, eyes steady, voice even. "I think it was bigger than you." And now we follow the threads. The automated alert flashed red across the bottom of the screen. Background irregularity detected. Employee Trent Collier. The alert system programmed to flag anomalies tied to personnel files hadn't triggered in over a year, but this one cut straight through the idle hum of the human resources floor at Sunbright's Bellero City headquarters. Luis Maddox, the head of compliance, glanced up from his coffee. He wasn't one for overreaction, but something about the timing of the alert, so close on the heels of the Barrett incident, made him lean forward. He tapped the blinking file open. Redactions several too many for a standard attendant. And there, buried in the emergency contact list, was a name that made Luis stop breathing for a full second. Victor Hale. Luis blinked and read it again. The same Victor Hale who had been banned from airport operations 18 months ago after an internal investigation uncovered unauthorized access to passenger data, tampered security training logs, and personnel files routed through a fake contractor group that Victor Hale. Maddox leaned back, his chair creaking under the weight of unease. Why was this man allowed back in proximity to passengers? He muttered to no one, his voice tight with disbelief. He picked up the phone, dialing internal security, his mind already calculating the possible PR fallout if the press made this connection before they did. Across the city, inside a dimly lit diner on 4th and Elwood, Trent Collier sat hunched over a chipped coffee mug, eyes flicking between the door and the clock above the register. He hadn't slept. His hair was messy, his uniform wrinkled from being shoved hastily into a duffel bag. He stirred his coffee with the handle of a spoon, ignoring the dull ache in his wrist from slamming it against the plane's door when security had removed him. Across from him sat a man in his late 40s, weathered but lean, dressed in civilian clothes that didn't quite hide the precision of his posture, Victor Hale. His presence exuded calm menace, the kind born from years of operating in the shadows and getting away with it. Victor tapped the edge of his mug twice, before finally breaking the silence. "You should have waited," Victor said without looking up. "You drew heat before the window opened." Trent rolled his eyes and gritted his teeth. Kid tried to play victim. He snapped. "And his father, he acts like he's some kind of royalty?" Victor stirred his coffee, his expression unreadable. "He isn't royalty, Trent. He's something worse." Trent frowned, confused. "Worse." Victor looked up, his gaze sharp and focused. "He's the kind of man who watches everything and says nothing until it's too late for you." Trent slammed his hand on the table, causing the mugs to rattle. "I didn't sign up to babysit some limp kid who wants sympathy points." Victor's eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped so low Trent had to lean in to hear. "You signed up to blend in. That was the deal. Eyes open, mouth shut. You weren't supposed to act." Trent shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "No one told me he'd be disabled. I didn't even know who the guy was until people started panicking." Victor let the silence stretch. Then he stood, slowly pulling a worn leather coat over his frame. The gesture deliberate. He placed a few bills on the table, ignoring the growing tremble in Trent's fingers. "You think this is about a kid with crutches?" Victor said, his tone almost pitying. "That child was never the issue. The moment he stepped on that plane, we lost the element of control, and you, with all your pride and impulse, handed him the spotlight." "I didn't do anything wrong," Trent insisted, his voice rising with a desperate edge. "I followed protocol. He was slow, uncooperative." "You broke him," Victor interrupted, the words hard as stone. "And in doing so, you activated the one man we couldn't afford to provoke." Trent blinked, trying to process, but the pieces didn't fit. "What are you talking about?" he asked, voice smaller now. Victor leaned closer, his mouth just inches from Trent's ear. The hum of the diner faded into the background, replaced by the hollow rush of consequence. "You didn't throw out crutches, Trent. You threw out a trigger. If that moment made your blood boil and your heart ache, don't scroll past. Subscribe and become a member, because staying silent helps cruelty win." The video hit the internet just before midnight. It began with grainy footage angled from a passenger's phone, showing the narrow aisle of the Sunbright aircraft, the edge of a jet bridge visible through the open door. In the frame, a boy moved slowly into the plane, balanced carefully on carbon fiber crutches. Then, like a gut punch, came the moment. The lead flight attendant, Trent Collier, snatching the crutches from the boy's arms and without a word flinging them out the door. The boy collapsed. The gasps, the silence, the arrogance on Trent's face. Back at the hotel, Elijah Barrett sat on the edge of a neatly made bed, the television off the room quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning unit. The glow of his tablet screen lit his face as his thumb scrolled through an avalanche of comments beneath the leaked footage. He hadn't searched for the video, it found him. A classmate had texted a link. He froze when he saw himself fall. His heart raced, a sinking feeling rising through his chest. The replay button hovered in the corner like a dare. Under the video, comment after comment flashed by. Is this real? Why would a grown man do that? Some kind of test? This feels staged. That kid's name is Elijah Barrett. Look him up. Elijah set the tablet down. His ankle, now wrapped and elevated, throbbed softly, but that pain was background now. He stared at the wall, silent. The door opened with a mechanical click, and Andre Barrett stepped into the room. Jacket slung over one arm, his shirt sleeves rolled up. His posture was stiff, calculated. His eyes scanned Elijah's face before glancing at the screen, still aglow on the bed. "You saw it," Andre said flatly, setting the jacket on the nearby chair. Elijah nodded. "It's everywhere." Andre walked to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. The city lights of Belarus shimmered in the distance. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. A man who had spent his life solving other people's crisis. This time it was personal. "It's starting," he said without turning. "Faster than I expected." Elijah picked up the tablet again. "Some people say it was my fault that I was too slow or that we made it up." Andre turned around slowly, the curtain falling shut behind him. That's how people protect themselves from the truth. They pretend injustice is fiction. A sharp ping from his secure laptop drew Andre's attention. He crossed the room, flipped it open, and typed in a long passphrase. A message blinked in from a private network. Trent was vouched for by Hale Aviation Services. "Remember the Horizon leak?" Andre's breath stilled. He opened a secure program, an encrypted mapping system that linked names, airports, contracts, and flagged risk assessments. The web of connections began to appear in real time. Small colored threads weaving between airline records, ground staff reports, background check discrepancies. One name kept pulsing at the center like a heartbeat. Victor Hale. Andre leaned in. They're active again. He remembered Hale well. Too well. A former airport security contractor known for extreme profiling methods and data manipulation. Hale had disappeared from formal channels after an internal review labeled his methods unethical and his agenda ideologically charged. Andre's fingers moved swiftly across the keys, isolating Trent's hiring file. One notation stood out. Expedited clearance, external verification source. Hale Aviation Services. He sat back, a cold realization forming in his mind. This wasn't just negligence, he said aloud, voice low measured. They're embedding people with agendas again. In the silence that followed, Elijah watched his father closely. The steady man who had once briefed generals was now on edge but not shaken, focused, sharpened by a familiar threat. "What are they trying to do?" Elijah asked softly. Andre looked up. "Create chaos, collect data, see who flinches." Before Elijah could ask more, another ping came through. This time a file upload. It was footage from a gate camera. A wide-angle shot of the jet bridge of Trent, hurling the Crutches with calculated ease. There was no mistaking the intent in his movements. There was no helping hand, no misstep, only precision. Andre stared at it, then shut the laptop. "Dad," Elijah said, his voice breaking slightly. "People think I'm a symbol now. I'm not. I was just trying to be with you." Andre sat beside him, placing a steady hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You didn't choose this, but you didn't back down either." Elijah looked away, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be famous for falling." Andre's grip tightened gently. "Then make them remember you for standing." There was a beat of silence before Andre rose, picking up his phone. The calm in his voice returned, stern and strategic. "I want a press conference tomorrow." He paused, then added with steel in his tone. "And I want Victor Hale in that room." The room was quiet, too quiet for a space filled with journalists. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above as cameras clicked into place and microphones were adjusted on thin silver stands. Rows of chairs faced a narrow stage framed by navy blue curtains, and at the center of the platform stood a single podium bearing the Belarus Airport Authority's seal. The press had expected a statement, perhaps a public apology, or the announcement of a lawsuit. But when the side doors opened and Andre Barrett entered, the air shifted. He didn't walk in alone. Two men in dark suits flanked him, their movements calculated and alert, each carrying a sealed folder with a crimson stripe. Elijah Barrett, seated in a sleek black wheelchair, followed close behind his father. His right ankle was wrapped in a tight brace, and his hands rested calmly in his lap. Though young, he held himself with the poise of someone who had already endured more than most adults in that room. Andre stepped to the podium, not glancing at the cameras or reporters. He took a breath steady and measured, before lifting his eyes to the crowd. Yesterday, he began his voice low but unwavering. My son's disability was mocked. His medical supports were violently discarded by a man posing as a flight attendant. But that man, Trent Collier, was not just an employee. He was a plant. The silence broke. Gasps, murmurs, the shifting of notepads, and frantic typing on keyboards filled the hall. A few reporters exchanged quick glances, sensing they had walked into something far more serious than a personal grievance. Andre reached into his jacket and removed a folder identical to those carried by the men beside him. He opened it and held up a document clearly marked confidential before placing it on the podium. Then another, then a third. These are internal records connecting Trent Collier to a man named Victor Hale, he said, his tone sharpening. Hale, a former security contractor with a long history of unauthorized operations, has been tied to data infiltration at 4 major airports. He paused to let that sink in. This wasn't a random act. This was a test. A test to see how far someone could go before someone like me noticed. The tension in the room deepened. Some reporters had stopped typing altogether, their attention locked on Andre. A man in the second row raised his hand and asked, "Mr. Barrett, are you suggesting there's a coordinated effort behind this?" "I'm not suggesting," Andre replied coldly. "I'm proving." He gestured to the agents beside him, who stepped forward and placed their sealed folders onto a nearby table, flipping them open in unison. Inside were surveillance photos, financial transaction logs, and printed communications between Hale and unknown recipients. Some of the images showed Trent with Victor Hale at diners outside restricted airport zones, even inside what appeared to be an employee locker room. From the back of the room, another reporter shouted, "Is Victor Hale here in Belarus?" Andre didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward the side of the stage and gave a subtle nod. A second door creaked open. A federal security agent entered, followed by another man, wrists cuffed, jaw tight, and eyes darting nervously beneath furrowed brows. His suit was wrinkled collar askew, the defiance in his posture slowly unraveling under the lights. Victor Hale. The reaction from the room was instant. Shouts, flashbulbs, a dozen voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. The agents led Hale past the stage toward a separate door at the opposite end of the hall. Never pausing, he kept his gaze straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the audience, the cameras, or the man who had exposed him. Only one pair of eyes followed him without blinking, Elijah Barrett. The boy leaned slightly forward in his wheelchair, eyes fixed on Hale like he was trying to see past him through him. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but crystal clear. "He's smaller than I thought." Andre, standing tall beside him, didn't turn his head. His voice was steady. Final bullies usually are. The fallout began within hours. By the time Elijah and Andre arrived at their hotel suite, the incident video had already crossed 500,000 views. A traveler who had been seated 3 rows behind them had discreetly recorded the entire event from the moment Trent snatched the crutches to Elijah's fall and Andre's restrained fury. The video was now headlining news sites and spreading fast across social media. Commentary flooded in each post, adding fuel to a fire that could no longer be contained. Inside Sunbright Air's executive tower, tension cut through the air like a drawn blade. The CEO, Charles Vanner, stood at the head of a conference room filled with anxious board members and legal advisors. The video played on a wall-mounted screen, looping silently in the background, as the room buzzed with disjointed questions and fragmented blame. "We need to own this," said Raymond Keyes, VP of Customer Affairs, his voice low but urgent. An apology-full acknowledgement not just to the family, but to the public. This is bigger than one flight. Charles nodded slowly, sweat glistening on his temple. "Release a statement," Frame it as a failure to detect unauthorized infiltration by external operatives. Mention our commitment to safety and retraining. He paused. And schedule an emergency board meeting tonight. The public statement dropped by midday. Sunbright Air acknowledges a serious breach of passenger trust stemming from the employment of personnel under falsified credentials. We deeply apologize to Mr. D. Andre Barrett and his son, Elijah Barrett, for the unacceptable behavior and resulting harm. Investigations have revealed that the individual responsible was placed by an external contractor without proper vetting. But even before the statement could calm the storm, a deeper thread began unraveling. Victor Hale's name emerged quietly but quickly. Independent investigators, journalists, aviation watchdogs, and even amateur online sleuths dug into his background. It didn't take long to find it. Once a contractor hired to test airport vulnerabilities, Hale had been dismissed after reports surfaced of him conducting unauthorized psychological stress simulations on staff and passengers. His methods were branded unethical and dangerous in an internal review. Yet somehow he'd disappeared without consequence. Now he was back, and this time he hadn't been testing the system. He had been embedding people into it. Trent Collier, as it turned out, had not come through the standard Sunbright Air recruitment pipeline. His file was incomplete, the referral source redacted. When a junior compliance officer flagged it earlier that week, no one had acted. Now that oversight was front-page news. At the hotel, Elijah sat on the edge of the sofa, his wrapped ankle propped on a pillow. The room was quiet, dimly lit by the afternoon sun pressing through sheer curtains. Across from him, Andre paced with his phone to his ear, speaking in measured tones. "No, not just Hale," Andre said. "I want a full scrape of his last 4 associates. Start with the flight crew at Gate 41B and cross-reference with his known contact list." Elijah shifted slightly, watching his father. "Dad." Andre paused, lowered the phone. "Yeah, son." Elijah looked unsure for a moment, then he said, "Do you think he did it because I'm like this?" He motioned to his ankle, then his crutches resting against the wall. Andre walked over and crouched down beside him, his eyes soft but steady. "I think he did it because he thought you were alone. But you weren't, and he just made the worst mistake of his life." There was a knock at the door. Andre opened it to find a courier mail, unformed, brisk, handing him an envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a note from a friend. "You're not wrong about Hale. He's been placing people quietly, strategically. You're not just dealing with cruelty. You're dealing with a plan." Andre plugged the drive into his secure laptop. A cascade of files appeared: employment records, surveillance timestamps, travel logs. Every document had one connection, Victor Hale, and every entry pointed to a calculated effort to infiltrate customer-facing positions across airports. At that moment, Elijah's tablet buzzed with notifications. He tapped the screen, eyes going wide. "Dad, look." Andre turned. On the screen was Elijah's name, trending. Posts flooded in under the hashtag #, Stand with Elijah. Parents from around the country were sharing photos of their children, some with wheelchairs, some with braces, some just smiling with messages of support. One post read, "He didn't cry, he didn't yell, he just got back up. My son wants to be like Elijah." Another to the boy who stood tall even after falling. "You represent more than you know." And then on a major news network, a reporter replayed a clip from Elijah's earlier interview. "He didn't just throw my crutches, he tried to throw away my dignity, but he failed." Andre stared at the screen, jaw tight with a blend of pride and burning purpose. Outside, protesters were already gathering at Sunbright's headquarters, demanding answers and reform. The noise was growing, but Andre was listening to a different frequency, the silence between the notes. Someone had given Hale clearance, someone higher than Collier, someone hiding still. He rose from the chair and walked to the window. Across the skyline, planes ascended and descended, unaware of the war brewing beneath their wings. Andre tapped another number into his phone. "Victor, Hale's just the entry point," he said into the receiver, his voice low and exact. "Now let's find out who funded him." The wind howled through the open hangar at the edge of the old Bellerose airstrip, sweeping dust across the cracked concrete floor. Floodlights flickered from a rusted ceiling, casting uneven shadows over the two men standing in the cold glow. Cullen Brooks, wiry with graying stubble and a sun-worn face, reached into his weathered leather jacket and pulled out a silver flash drive. No ceremony, no words of friendship, just business. "You didn't hear this from me," Cullen said, his voice growly and low. His eyes darted toward the darkened runway as if expecting someone to step out of the shadows. But Hale wasn't acting alone. "There's a funding trail, and you're not going to like where it leads." Andre Barrett didn't flinch. His fingers closed around the drive, steady as ever. But in his eyes, something shifted. A cold flicker of recognition. A long-buried instinct awakening. He said nothing at first, just stared at the metal between his fingers as if he could already see what it held. Cullen exhaled, slowly nodding once. "It's all on there. Payment logs, masked donor accounts, routing slips through offshore firms. Most of it looks like gibberish unless you know how to read ghost trails." Andre slipped the drive into an inner pocket of his coat, zipped it shut, and finally spoke. "There's more, isn't there?" Cullen hesitated. Then he reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a slim black recorder. He pressed play. From the tiny speaker came a faint crackle, followed by a voice deep, composed, and unmistakably authoritative. "Run the test flights. Filter the weaker elements. See who pushes back." Andre's entire body went still. His breathing didn't change. His expression didn't shift. But inside a memory surged. Sharp, immediate, undeniable. He knew that voice. Years ago, in a secure Pentagon briefing room, he'd spoken directly to the man behind it. Back then, the man was an analyst, a sharp one, smart, ruthless. And now he was running one of the most secretive private intelligence firms in the country. "They're not testing passengers," Andre murmured more to himself than Cullen. His gaze drifted toward the open hangar door, toward the city in the distance. "They're testing silence." Cullen stepped back as if his part in this was done. "You always said you'd know when it started again." "Well, it started, and this time they're not hiding in the shadows. They're buying the whole runway." Andre nodded once, no words needed. He turned, walking toward the waiting SUV at the edge of the tarmac. The flash drive in his coat felt heavier than it should have, a piece of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to see again. Back at the hotel, the room was quiet, except for the occasional tapping of Elijah's fingers on a tablet. He sat cross-legged on the bed, his ankle propped up on a pillow wrapped in layers of gauze. A soft glow lit his face as he worked through a school assignment, an essay on strength of all things. He paused, thoughtful, then typed a single line. "Sometimes standing up means sitting down and still being unshakable." It felt right. Not dramatic, just real. The door opened with a soft click. Andre entered, removing his coat and setting his briefcase by the table. His face was unreadable, but his eyes landed immediately on Elijah's wrapped ankle. A flicker of something crossed his face. Concern, anger, purpose, but it vanished just as quickly. Elijah glanced up. "You were gone a while." Andre sat at the edge of the bed and pulled the flash drive from his pocket. He didn't hand it over, not yet, but held it between his fingers, rolling at once. "This," he said quietly, "isn't just proof. It's direction, strategy, funding, names." Elijah looked at it, then at his father. "What are you going to do with it?" Andre turned the drive over in his palm and then met his son's eyes. "One day, this will be yours, but for now, we're just getting started." Elijah nodded. "Then let's not stop." The recording played on a loop, its grainy audio filling the once silent boardroom at Sunbright Air's headquarters. Executives sat rigid around the long, polished mahogany table, their expressions shifting from stunned disbelief to panicked realization. The voice on the tape was unmistakably Trent Collier's, mocking, smug, and dangerous. "Sheesh, you should have seen the fall." Trent sneered through the tiny speaker. "Kid hit the floor like dead weight. They all think I snapped. Nah, this is bigger than this dumb airline. You just wait. Phase 2 was going to be the fun part." The recording ended with the faint sound of a chuckle, and the room fell silent again. Raymond Keyes, the vice president of customer affairs, broke the quiet first. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the monitor knuckles pale against the table. "This is a disaster. Do you all understand what this means?" The head of legal, Marcus Darnell, ran a hand down his face, eyes darting nervously. "We can push a settlement, frame it as a rogue employee incident. Distance ourselves. Distance." Raymond's voice was sharp. "Now we didn't just fail background checks. We embedded a saboteur, a man who humiliated a disabled child on camera under our uniform. There are no settlements big enough to buy silence this time." At that moment, a junior assistant entered quietly, holding a printed audit report. He handed it to the CFO, who flipped through the pages, his face growing paler with each turn. "There's more," the CFO muttered. "Internal audit found 12 no 15 other employees across multiple airports with incomplete identity verifications. Some of them were placed via outside contracts, shell agencies, no verified credentials, no proper onboarding records." "Who signed off on this?" demanded Raymond. No one answered. In another corner of the city, Andre Barrett sat at a long table inside a government oversight committee chamber. His tone was calm, his presence commanding. The room was lined with suits, inspectors, advisors, analysts, all watching him closely as he presented the Barrett Protocol, a document bound in dark blue stamped with an official seal. "Passenger safety is not just about physical threats," Andre said evenly. "It's about ethical protection. It's about identifying infiltration before the damage is done. This protocol includes real-time personnel tracking, deeper screening for contracted agents, and immediate red flags for any unauthorized background access." One of the older committee members, a former general, folded his hands thoughtfully. "You believe this network goes beyond one man?" Andre didn't blink. "I believe we've only seen the surface, but before we dig deeper, we need to seal the breaches." They voted that afternoon. The Barrett Protocol passed without opposition. Back home, Elijah sat in the living room, propped up on a couch with his ankle carefully braced. His laptop rested on his lap, open to a classroom video call. His teacher, Mr. Givens, smiled warmly from the screen. "Elijah, would you like to share anything with your classmates today?" For a moment, Elijah hesitated. The screen filled with the faces of classmates, some curious, others quiet with respect. Then Elijah leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but unwavering. "I learned that power doesn't always look like yelling," he said. "Sometimes it's just refusing to stay quiet." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning unit overhead. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as Andre Barrett sat at the far end of a narrow, windowless government office in downtown Bellaro City. A thick manila folder sat unopened in front of him on the metal table. 3 men occupied the opposite side. 2 federal analysts and 1 intelligence committee liaison, all watching him with attention that mirrored the gravity of what he was about to say. Andre's fingers tapped once on the folder before he opened it and pushed the contents forward. Payment logs, surveillance memos, and marked-up personnel records slid across the cold metal. "These are not just anomalies," he said, his voice controlled, but low, like someone used to briefing others on things they didn't want to hear. "They're patterns, and they've gone unnoticed or ignored for too long." The senior analyst, a broad-shouldered man with graying temples, adjusted his tie. "Mr. Barrett, are you saying what happened at Northgate wasn't an isolated breach?" Andre didn't answer right away. He looked to the small security camera mounted in the corner of the room, then back to the analyst. "It wasn't an accident," he said firmly. It was a data point. My son was never just a passenger. He was part of a test. One of the younger men leaned forward, skeptical. A test for what exactly? Andre's jaw tensed. He pulled out a USB drive, inserted it into the provided terminal, and tapped a few keys. A short audio file played. The voice was low, calculated, and familiar. Someone Andre had once briefed during his time in military operations. Run the test flights, filter the weaker elements, see who pushes back. The words hung in the air like smoke. I know that voice, Andre said quietly. He used to sit in on classified briefings. He's no longer government, but his firm is running a private operation inside airline systems. They're embedding people like Victor Hale using compromised employees like Trent Collier. The goal isn't sabotage, it's silence. They're studying how far they can go before someone resists. The men exchanged tense glances. This was no longer a story about one airline, one corrupt handler, or one disabled boy. It was bigger, systemic. Back at Elijah's school, life had started to regain a rhythm, but nothing was quite the same. He still walked with care. His ankle mostly healed, but the stares had shifted. No longer curious or pitying now, they were filled with respect. The boy, who had once been seen as fragile, was now quietly admired. Some teachers gave him a knowing nod in the halls. A few students, who had never spoken to him before, now lingered to ask questions about the news or simply say they were glad he was back. One afternoon, Principal Harding stopped him after lunch. Elijah, the school board is holding an event on student advocacy. They want you to speak. Elijah blinked, unsure. Me. Harding smiled. You've earned the microphone. The auditorium buzzed with quiet chatter that Thursday evening. Parents, teachers, board members all gathered for what they thought would be a few short speeches. Elijah sat off stage, hands curled in his lap, trying not to fidget. Andre watched from the second row, seated in silence, his phone turned off. No distractions, just this moment. When Elijah's name was called, he wheeled forward, gripping the podium tightly. The lights above were too bright, and for a second he wanted to disappear. But then he spotted his father in the crowd, calm, steady, and took a breath. I was told I should talk about what happened at the airport, Elijah began. His voice wavered slightly but grew stronger with each word. But I don't want to talk about just that. I want to talk about what happens after. He paused, scanning the crowd. The room leaned in. There will always be people who think less of you because of what they don't understand. Some will try to define you by what they see, but that's not power. Power isn't in what they say. It's in how you carry yourself. He tightened his grip on the podium. Don't give people power over your worth, he said, his voice now unwavering. Make them work to see it. The auditorium was still. Then applause broke out, slow at first, then building into a standing ovation. Some clapped with pride, others with guilt, and a few with tears. In the second row, Andre didn't clap. He just watched, quietly, proudly. The mission he'd started years ago to protect, to dismantle harm, to fight injustice, wasn't over. But now it had a new face, a younger one, a stronger one, and his name is Elijah Barrett. The crowd stood in near silence as the velvet cloth was drawn back, revealing a bronze plaque mounted on a marble pedestal. Sunlight glinted off the engraved letters in honor of Elijah Barrett, whose strength reminded the world that silence is never safety and dignity is never optional. A ripple of hushed murmurs spread through the gathering at Northgate International Airport's Gate 41B. Travelers paused mid-stride. Reporters lowered their microphones. Airport staff stood a little taller. Among them, 12-year-old Elijah Barrett stood straight and steady on both feet, no crutches. His right leg bore a subtle brace beneath his jeans, but he wore it like armor, not a mark of weakness. Beside him stood Andre Barrett, composed as ever, hands folded in front of him, his suit perfectly pressed. He said nothing. He hadn't come to give a statement. He'd come to watch. A young journalist with a notepad in one hand stepped forward. Mr. Barrett, Do you have any words for the press? Anything you'd like to say on this anniversary? Andre glanced at Elijah, then back at the reporter. This isn't about us anymore, he said quietly, his voice smooth but final. The journalist stepped back, silenced by the weight in those few words. The cameras panned slowly across the space. A large screen nearby played clips of public rallies, school speeches, and community town halls sparked by the original incident. But the footage that drew the most attention was the one that had gone viral. The moment Trent Collier threw Elijah's crutches from the plane, followed by the boy's collapse. That video had been played millions of times. Today, though, it played without commentary, without overlays, just truth, raw and unedited. Elijah looked up at the plaque again. His face was calm, but his fingers were gently twitching against the seams of his jacket. Andre noticed. He placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder, not to steady him, but to remind him he was never alone. After a few more minutes, the crowd began to disperse, and the sound of footsteps and rolling luggage returned to the terminal. Elijah exhaled. Weird to see it like that, he murmured. Out in the open permanent. Andre nodded slowly, scanning the passers-by. It's not weird, it's earned. Security approached to escort them to the gate. This time, the airline staff didn't just recognize them, they greeted them with visible respect. A supervisor, a clean-shaven man in his 50s named Daryl Benson, extended a hand to Elijah. We've made a lot of changes because of you, he said with a rare softness in his voice. We're better now because you didn't stay silent. Elijah shook his hand without hesitation. Then don't forget why it happened, he replied, his tone steady. Don't forget anyone. Daryl swallowed and nodded, stepping aside as Elijah and Andre proceeded through the priority line. At the gate, the attendant uniform, crisp smile genuine, gestured toward the jet bridge. Mr. Barrett, Elijah, welcome aboard. No assumptions, no condescension, just respect. As they boarded, Elijah walked unaided. He paused at the threshold of the aircraft, his eyes scanning the cabin, the polished floors, the overhead lights, the wide seats of the first-class cabin. A flight attendant younger than Trent stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. If there's anything you need, we're here, he said. Elijah nodded. I'll let you know. And he walked in. They took their seats near the front of the plane. Elijah positioned his foot, carefully adjusting the ankle brace beneath the seat. The cabin began to fill with the low hum of pre-flight activity over head bins, opening and closing the dull roll of luggage wheels, the occasional distant announcement. The sun poured in through the window, casting light across Andre's face. Elijah turned toward him, eyes thoughtful. Think anyone will recognize me? Andre smiled faintly, not turning away from the window. Maybe, but if they don't make them. The engines hummed to life. The runway stretched ahead, and as the plane lifted into the clouds, there was no fear, no silence, no apology. And behind them, the world had changed. All because one boy stood his ground even after he fell. He thought he was pushing down someone weak until he saw who was rising up behind him. If you stand for justice, protection, and power, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together we rise. Disclaimer. This story is a fictional dramatization intended to highlight the impact of racism and ableism. It is not based on real events and is designed to raise awareness and inspire meaningful conversations about dignity, justice, and accountability.